Loach. I am the senior staff attorney for the South Carolina Association of Counties.
Sue Leeson, Senior Justice, Oregon Supreme Court.
And Beth Ratway, Senior Technical Assistance Coordinator for the American Institutes for Research.
Right. And I'll ask the team if you'll introduce yourself.
I'm Jenna Scott. I'm Hannah Bickle. I'm Malia Smith. We are students at Laurel High School. Our honor civics teacher is Mr. Deming.
All right. Thank you very much. Just to let you know, you might want to try to speak up if you're going to have the mask on, because it was a little muffled in your introduction. But we will, of course, be reading question 2 from Unit 2. So whenever you're ready, I will read the question and then you can begin. One founder claimed that representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders? What alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? You may begin.
This claim comes from Federalist 10, written by James Madison. As a panel, we agree with this claim that constituents' views should be represented by a wise group of elected officials. The U.S. should be represented by people who are able to make wise decisions in the best interest of its people. This is supported by the ideals of a Republican government. However, we also understand that today there are many problems within the system that the founders may not have seen.
In Federalist 10, Madison argues that a republic is different from a democracy because the public's views are represented by a small number of elected representatives. In this use of the word democracy, he is referring to a direct democracy, and republic refers to a representative government. According to Aristotle, a direct democracy is a corrupt form of government. At the time of the formation of the country, the majority of people were uneducated and ill-informed. So forming a government in which delegates who were well-educated and knowledgeable and who were chosen to represent the interests of the public made sense for the type of government that the framers wished to have.
This supports the idea that the framers wanted representatives that would be wise and would work for the best interests of their country. Our representatives should be intelligent, informed, and well-versed in the structure and the systems of the United States government. We want people who represent us to be working in the best interest of their constituents as well, and not just in the interest of themselves. This is harder to discern, however, because some politicians may seem like they are working for the good of the people, but truly are only looking out for themselves, those within their political party, or their financial donors.
Madison makes the point that representatives should work to refine the public's views. This type of representation is ideally what would happen. However, the way the government is now, political parties and factions have more sway than the citizens. The representatives more or less serve the interests of their parties rather than the interests of their constituents. Many framers like Washington and Madison openly spoke against joining factions. So how the government functions now is somewhat removed from what the framers had intended.
To answer the first bullet, the framers considered 2 plans for representation at the Philadelphia Convention, the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. The Virginia Plan called for proportional representation based on population. The New Jersey Plan called for equal representation for each state. However, neither plan was adopted completely. They decided to add aspects of both with equal representation in the Senate and proportional representation in the House. This is known as the Great Compromise. The framers also had other ideas about representation, specifically in the legislative houses. Whether representatives would be delegates or trustees. Trustees were given the autonomy to do what they saw fit, whether or not that coincided with what their constituents wanted. Delegates, on the other hand, are confined to work for the interest of their constituents. With much deliberation, the framers built the legislative branch with both types of representation theories in mind. The Senate would have longer terms, so it would be more trustee-based, and the House would have shorter terms, therefore it would be more delegate-based.
To answer the second bullet, one of the alternative forms of representation that we may consider today includes completely proportional representation. It is argued that representatives should be chosen based on population, not by state, some even saying that we should completely abolish the Senate. In reality, however, it would be very difficult to make such a large structural change. In Article 5 of the Constitution, it states, "No state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate." It is the only thing the Constitution states cannot be amended. This is because the founders have decided in the Great Compromise that each state would have equal representation as well as proportional.
We believe that the people's views are best represented when refined by an elected group of representatives. The framers provided for this in the Constitution, and it upholds the principle of a representative government. However, as times have changed, we have moved farther away from that ideal and instead gotten to a place where representatives work more for their own interests and their political party's interests rather than their constituents. We are now open to answering questions.
Thank you very much. Sue, do you want to start us out?
Sure. As I understand your presentation, there was a golden age of representation anticipated by the founders, and we have moved away from that in modern times. I'm wondering how that theory squares with your reading of Madison's argument in Federalist 10. Can you help me understand?
Could you clarify the question?
We've gotten worse over time, is your theory. That the refined views that were the ideals in Federalist 10 are not being recognized today because representatives are less informed. They're working more on behalf of their parties than on behalf of the people. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Okay. What I'm asking you is how that theory, whether that theory actually squares with your reading of Madison's argument in Federalist 10.
In Federalist 10, Madison argued that the government would be able to be represented and factions would not happen because of the large size of our government, and also the fact that it was a representative government. And we can see that that has sort of not happened today. And I believe that Madison's prediction may have been wrong because we see that we do have two major political parties today, which Madison did not predict in Federalist 10.
Thank you.
So do you feel, based on your presentation and based on now your analysis of the system that we have, do you feel like our diverse population is truly represented in the system that we have?
I don't think that our population is like there's not the same amount of representation. Like personally, I think that like within the House of Representatives, there should be like equal representation of the actual population. Like with the census that happened last year, 13% of the population in the US is African American or Black. And I think that should show also in the congressional houses.
How would you do that? And anybody can answer, it doesn't just have to be you.
I think one way to do that would be make it easier somehow for those people in the minority groups to run for government and to be elected in those places. And there are certain things that may be blocking that. And so removing those obstacles would make it easier to do.
Currently, we have like basically a political class where they are the only ones that are able to run because they have enough money to do so, because it is very expensive to run for office. But I feel like if it was more available, we would have better options for representatives that actually show the ideas of the people rather than like just political parties.
Another option to go back to, I believe it was George Washington's theory that for every one representative, there should be about 30,000 people that they are representing, and to go back to that to truly allow more people to have their representative.
Be like 1,100 people, right? Ish, in Congress, give or take a couple. And that what you think that would work?
If we divided up into categories, say, for each bill and had certain representatives working together to accomplish things, and certain representatives that had very similar sets of constituents working together, I believe that yes, it would.
And I think to kind of give an opposite opinion to that would be that we may not need to add as many as George Washington's ratio had stated, but to add more representatives, not quite 1,100 or whatever the number was, to
Yeah.
it might be a little bit too much, but I say just adding a few more representatives instead of that many could be another option.
John?
How does changing just the size of the house, how does that make it easier for certain groups, rather, I don't want to use the word parties, but certain groups to run for office? Because I think isn't the cost of running and the ability to run, that's more of a state rather than a national issue?
I would say that it's kind of both because they are being a part of the national government, but I don't think having like a set limit on the amount of money that you can use to run would be something that they could add to be more accessible to other people of other groups.
And adding more representation would allow more groups to have their voices heard. We do have multiple candidates in the past that have come from parties outside of our Democratic and Republican Party who have had the money to run, but have not had their voices heard because they do not have the representation in other levels, such as state levels, to have their parties understood by the American people.
In order to avoid the problems with political parties that you've identified, would you support an initiative process at the national and or state levels so that people could directly have input into legislation?
Could you clarify?
Do you know what an initiative is? Do you not have that in Montana? It's direct lawmaking by the people at the ballot box. So somebody puts an initiative on the ballot and it says, we will raise taxes by 25%, and people vote yes or no. 24 states have the initiative process now. Is that a bad thing, a good thing? Should we move it to the national level?
I think it can be a good thing to have because it gives like regular citizens that they can have effect on the government. I don't know if having it at a national level would be very effective. I think if we made it like you could do it for your state rather than having it on like a national level of it goes for everyone. But I think having it just for the state level, it would be good.
And to argue that the other way, I believe that it could be beneficial as in Federalist 10, one of James Madison's proposed ways to control factions was to have a consistent vote through the people that would allow everybody to have their voices be heard. And I guess in a way that could be taken as kind of the type of process he was talking about by putting the vote directly to the citizens and having them vote to have their voices heard individually. Though he did comment that this would potentially cause legislation to back up and get clogged, but it would also be beneficial to those who were potentially minorities who would otherwise not have their voices heard through representatives.
I think that's time. Thank you.
Wow, that went fast.
I know.
Sue, you want to start?
Shall I start this time?
Yeah.
That was a very engaging conversation. You've certainly given us a lot to think about. I'm going to push you on in two respects. I have read the records of the convention and taken classes in them, and I honestly do not remember ever seeing the argument that the House of Representatives should adopt or reflect a delegate theory of representation, while the Senate would reflect a trustee theory of representation. That's a very bold statement, and that needs some supporting evidence behind it. The other place that needs some more supporting evidence is your understanding of factions. Madison defines a faction as a group motivated by a passion or an interest, and it can either be a majority or a minority. Now, here's the really definitional important point: adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. And so to characterize political parties as two large factions is a really damning commentary that I don't know if you meant to make or not, because it amounts to the view from a Madisonian perspective that both political parties do not have the interests of the country in mind. And maybe that's a point you want to make. All I'm urging you to do is own it. If you believe that, own it and defend it. I think you made some other very, very good proposals for ways things could perhaps be modified without having to make radical political change. And in this country, that's probably a practical solution. Anyway, nice presentation. Thank you so much for your hard work.
Thank you.
I mean, I would agree. You had some good nuggets in your opening presentation, things that we would, want to hear. I would echo Sue in terms of thinking about and maybe rereading Federalist 10 and getting a sense of what they were talking about, so it can really be unpacked in your presentation. And then the concept going to 51 about factions, because if you're going to talk about it, then you need to make sure you try to understand. It's hard. Try to understand how they're talking about it, because this question in this unit, it's a difficult unit. This question, this unit, get at that historical kind of interpretation and thinking about what they actually said and what they were looking at. I mean, you talked about the normals, right? New Jersey, Virginia, the compromise. So that was good. Talking about Article 5, bringing that up. I would have liked to hear a cleaner, really solid answer to the bullet, like take a stand, and the second bullet, and what would you do, and how could that get done in terms of that. I think in our follow-ups, you really were engaging with us. You were thinking through it, and you could feel the cognitive dissonance. What I like to say is it's uncomfortable, but it's good. That's what we're here for. We're here to push you. We're not here to say, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, but we're here to push you and help you think through these really, these are critical elements you can see that are really relevant to today, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think you're there in terms of that analysis and really kind of thinking deeper. And thank you for having this conversation with us.
Yeah.
And thank you. I think this was engaging with us. You answered our questions nicely. I do like that in your presentation that you actually went so far as to suggest the possibility that the U.S. Senate needs to be abolished. It's something that most teams have not been willing to do. The one area that I would challenge you on is I would like to have heard a little more evidence supporting your notion that the provisions for the Senate forever being a body representing the states and that the makeup of the Senate could never be amended. I think that's a pretty bold statement, because I would suggest there's probably nothing in the Constitution that could not be amended through the amendment process. And I'd like to have heard a little more of why you thought that those provisions could never be amended.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Montana. Thank you so much, judges. I'm gonna, thank you.